Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony, which will today commemorate the centenary anniversary of the Battle of Brood-Sender Ridge. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Corporal Jeanette McNeely. We warmly welcome the family of Lance Corporal Robert Bruce McMillan, whose story will be told shortly. We're honoured to acknowledge Ms. Chang Wee Ni, CEO of the National Heritage Board Singapore, and His Excellency Mr. Wok Fook Seng, High Commissioner of Singapore. We're also honoured to acknowledge Mr. John King, President, ACT State Branch, the Returned and Services League of Australia. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. In particular today, the members of Emu Park and Castle Hill sub-branches who are in attendance this evening. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family, visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From Queensland, St Ignatius Primary School, Toowong. And from Western Australia, Trinity College Secondary Department, East Perth. Australia's Federation Guard is a tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. Could I ask you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem? Students, you may be seated. I would now like to invite Dr. Brendan Nelson, Director of the Australian War Memorial, to address you.
In Flanders, Belgium, is the Tyncot Cemetery. And today, as you stand before it and look before you, up to 12,000 graves and headstones, among them are the graves of 1,369 Australians. Mounted on the German concrete blockhouse, in the centre of this, the largest Commonwealth war grave cemetery in the world, is the Cross of Sacrifice, standing above one of the original German concrete blockhouses, from which machine gun fire enfiladed into the Australians, New Zealanders, and British troops caught on barbed wire. There is a plaque on that blockhouse today in the centre of the cemetery which reads, "This was the Tyncot blockhouse, captured by the 3rd Australian Division, 4th October 1917. The 1st and 2nd Australian Divisions had met with success in the Passchendaele campaign, and the battles of the Menin Road in September, followed by the 4th and 5th Australian Divisions' push through Polygon Wood. Before dawn, 100 years ago today, on the 4th of October 1917, the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Divisions, with the New Zealand Division, prepared to attack German positions on Broadsend Ridge. At 5:30 a.m, a German artillery bombardment fell with heavy casualties before the attack had even begun. Half an hour later, the Australians advanced, only to be confronted by a line of troops advancing towards them in no man's land. The Germans had chosen the same morning to launch an attack of their own. The Germans fought ferociously and tenaciously from those pillboxes, machine gun fire, vicious bombing duels and hand-to-hand combat. Private William Vincent fought in the 21st Battalion, and he wrote, "At 5 a.m, a very heavy artillery barrage started, and we went forward about 2 miles, our lads falling in dozens. We dug in for our lives and held it. We lost heavily." The Australians pushed forward through the German assault waves to take Broadsend Ridge. The battle was seen as a great success and came to be recorded as the Black Day of October 4 in the official German history. Then the following night it began to rain, and it rained and it rained. The devastating battlefield became a quagmire. It was impossible to drag forward enough artillery and ammunition to maintain adequate support. Morale was hemorrhaging. Private Dudley Jackson, a Lewis gunner with the 20th Battalion, came out of Broodsend with just 25 in his company and only 2 men left in his own platoon. Almost all the objectives were achieved, but another 6,400 Australians dead, wounded or missing. Victoria Crosses were awarded to Lance Corporal Walter Peeler of the 3rd Pioneer Battalion and posthumously to the great Tasmanian Sergeant Lewis McGee of the 40th Battalion. After 3 months, the British line in the Passchendaele Campaign, otherwise known as the Third Battle of Ypres, advanced 8 kilometres to capture the Passchendaele village, only to expose it to German artillery. British losses stood at 275,000 dead, wounded and missing. 35 Australians had been killed for every metre of ground that had been gained in the Passchendaele campaign. 9 of 61 Victoria Crosses awarded were to Australians. Then 5 months later, the Germans took it all back in 3 days. Today we remember the Battle of Broodsend Ridge. We honour those who served, suffered and died for Australia, and the inconsolable mourning and grief of a generation of Australian families who gave their all for this country.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations over more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Robert Bruce McMillan. Fondly known as Bob, Robert McMillan was born in 1882 to the large family of Archie and Mary McMillan of Yagara, New South Wales. After growing up on the family estate of Rosebank, McMillan worked as a farmer. He was often described as a remarkable man, full of ambition, as often displayed by his excellent collection of agricultural produce exhibited at the different shows. Robert's nephew Roy enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force shortly after the outbreak of war in 1914 and landed on Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915. The following June, the family learned that Roy had been wounded in action, but would not receive confirmation that he had been killed in action until the following year. By then, Robert and his youngest brother Viv had been determined to join the AIF. After enlisting in July 1915, they were posted to the 18th Battalion, leaving Australia together on the 5th of October on the troop ship Themistocles. Robert and Viv were first sent to Egypt, where they trained in the desert. In March 1916, they left to join the fight on the Western Front. They wrote home shortly after their arrival to let their family know that they were going strong in France and had so far escaped harm. But before the letter had arrived in Australia, Private Robert McMillan had to send a cable home to tell his family that Viv had been killed in action, shot by a sniper while placing barbed wire in no man's land at night. Bob wrote a longer account a few days later, saying, "This is a task for me to acquaint you of all of poor old Viv's end. There is one consolation, at least to know the end was instantaneous." A few weeks later, the 18th Battalion took part in the fighting around the French village of Pozières. Not long after reaching the front line, Robert McMillan was wounded by a shell fragment which struck him in the nose. He was sent to hospital in France, but recovered quickly and rejoined his battalion in August 1916. McMillan's health suffered as the 18th Battalion spent the bitterly cold winter of 1916 and 1917 rotating in and out of the front line. He suffered from trench foot repeatedly, each time returning to the front line after a brief spell in hospital. In August 1917, McMillan was promoted to Lance Corporal. A few months later, on the 5th of October 1917, the 18th Battalion moved into the front lines on the Brunsire Ridge. The previous day, Australian troops had successfully pushed through German assault waves to take the position. As McMillan and the other men of the 18th Battalion approached the ridge, they came under heavy bombardment and took shelter in some nearby trenches. A shell landed almost on top of Lance Corporal McMillan, who was killed instantly. He was buried where he fell, but after the war, his grave was moved to the Commonwealth War Cemetery at Tyncott, where he lies today under the simple epitaph, "He gave his life for his country." Robert McMillan was 36 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right among more than 60,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Robert Bruce McMillan, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.